It means a lot to us to have this opportunity to host everyone and to celebrate what is often an underappreciated art of public speaking and argumentation, particularly considering that this is our KC 125. The motion that we are debating in this venue today is this House prefers co-ed schools. And on my left, in proposition, we have Kingswood College, and on my right, in opposition, we have the DSG. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone of a couple of rules and just general courtesy. I'd ask the audience to minimize noise as much as possible. Obviously, that includes chatting. It includes things like, please turn off your cell phones. But also, if you particularly agree or disagree with the point a speaker is making, try and show your appreciation without making noise. So no clapping, no clicking of fingers, no banging on the seats. Rather, let's all pretend that we're on Broadway and use jazz hands for tonight. However, once the speech is concluded, you are welcomed and indeed encouraged to support your school and the other by making as much applause as you possibly can. Each speaker will speak for 6 minutes in their substantive speeches. The reply speeches will be 3 minutes long, and these will be timed. There will be time signals at 1 minute into the speech, 5 minutes, at 6 minutes, and at 6 minutes and 15 seconds, speakers will be tapped out, and whatever they say beyond that point won't be taken into account by the adjudication panel in its great wisdom and experience. So, without further ado, let's move into what I'm sure is going to be a wonderful debate, and welcome the first speaker from the proposition of Kingswood College. Thank you.
Good evening, floor at large. I'll be your first speaker for side proposition tonight. The motion set before us tonight is, this House prefers co-ed schools. Definitions. Well, we just thought we'd clarify co-ed schools, boys and girls allowed, single-sex schools, either only girls or only boys. Our burden of proof. Co-ed schools are a preferable social environment or system to approach the outside world. Case split. I will be talking about alienating the other gender. My second speaker will be talking about confidence and working better with the other gender. My third speaker will solidify our debate with rebuttal, and I'll return for replies. On to my positive matter. This House prefers co-ed schools because single-sex schools alienate the other gender, and in alienating the other gender, alienate yourself emotionally and academically from what you could achieve. If you've gone to a single-sex school from about junior school, you never really get to interact with the other gender. And in never interacting with them, you never get to see them mess up, and they never get to see you mess up. But why is that important? Well, more often than not, you'll see an all-girls school almost praising their brother school, total admiration. And it creates this huge inferiority complex that, and you never really get to see the other gender being human. Well, when the brother school goes to do war cries, you'll see the girls squealing and running to go and watch them eagerly as if the boys were the most interesting thing in the world. And you get to see them mess up more often if you go to a co-ed school, and you get to see that they're people, and you get to see that part of them, that they aren't really that different from you, and they aren't that scary either. And as for messing up yourself, you realize that it's not the end of the world if you do, and you get comfortable taking risks and being yourself in front of the opposite gender, both in social situations and later on in business situations and in class situations. These skills are useful and applicable to the motion because in the outside world, you need to be able to be confident in presenting yourself in business and social situations without the fear that just because someone is of the opposite gender, they're going to ridicule you for messing up. If you feel more comfortable around the other gender, you're more likely to be able to form personal relationships and social groups, which are a very large defining part of life, especially once you have left school, because your social group is pretty much all you have once you've left. They're your peers, support, comfort, and everything that you've got. So, in going to co-ed schools, you build relationships and learn about communicating with the other gender. And these skills are useful for the rest of your life in every aspect of your life. And if that isn't important, then I really don't know what is. The reason you only learn these things at co-ed schools is because single-sex schools encourage things like toxic masculinity, for example, that boys are oh so amazing and girls should giggle and squeal and run to watch their matches and their war cries, when the majority of boys, you will find, don't support their sister schools. And the other part of the school that was added, and it's just like some other little thing on the side. It's the way that it's often viewed. Just some other little asset or marketing tool. In all boys' schools, boys are encouraged to fit into the stereotypical gender roles, what the right idea of what a man should be. And there's no goals to tone it down or offer any other substitute and keep them in check. It's often frowned upon in all boys' schools to be overly emotional and thoughtful, whereas girls, even though not all girls are emotional, I'm not saying that, but because that's the way that girls are often perceived, it offers that aspect for boys to fit into, and it offers circles that boys could fit into. And they can encourage these traits with each other without the thought of being ridiculed and being excluded from a friendship group, because you would already have a friendship group. And likewise, girls could be more active and wilder and fit into typically more boyish kinds of groups. And it offers a diverse dynamic equally that we can all find we can fit into whatever role we like. And I mean, if you go to a co-ed school and you think that, oh, those children are just going to value romantic relationships more than school, but that's utter rubbish, because yes, at first you might be more likely to end up in a romantic relationship, but you will soon realize, because it will inevitably crash and burn, when you will inevitably realize that the things that you thought were so amazing about the other gender are probably not going to be that great, and they're going to have other traits you didn't even realize that are going to be good, that are going to make them wonderful friends. Not only to mention that the build-up of toxic masculinity and all, it just turns out to be very against this whole big feminist movement that the entire world has been, pushing for so long. We are equals, so why would you separate us? If we're going to be all together in the rest of the world, why would we separate now and learn a whole bunch of skills to only work with girls or to only work with boys when we're going to go out into the world and interact with everybody anyway? So, to conclude this point, this House prefers co-ed schools because single-sex schools alienate the other gender and bring out typical negative qualities in each individual gender. Co-ed schools approaching the outside world. Thank you.
The House thanks the first proposition speaker for their speech and calls on the first opposition speaker to open their case before the floor tonight.
Good evening to the floor at large. I would like to, my biggest clash, I clash directly with your BOP for we aim to prove that patriarchy is so pervasive, subjecting girls to a co-ed environment, and is often traumatic experience, where single-sex schools create a model to empower women, and it mitigates pervasive nature of patriarchy. I'll now begin with my rebuttal. Prop 1 seemed to use the stereotype that girls will squeal and giggle if they are in a single-sex school, where I believe this is exactly what we're trying to avoid, and that often gender roles are more enforced in co-ed schools, and that this stereotype that has been so enforced by the Prop 1 is really just what we're trying to avoid, and it is not only exclusive to single-sex schools. You also say we never see really the other gender. I would like to remind proposition that we're not isolating girls from boys and boys from girls. They're still going to get other social interactions with boys. And also, there was a lot more stereotypes about praising the other school, seeing them mess up. Again, we're not isolating girls from boys. You still see them, you still have other family members. Yeah. Also, you say get comfortable. You feel comfortable being yourself. Later I will speak about how that, as I said in my BOP, how girls are often not that they are often not comfortable being themselves, as I'll talk about later. Also, you mentioned toxic masculinity. Again, I feel that this is not exclusive to single-sex schools, and that it happens both ways, and it is actually even more prominent in co-ed schools. I'll now begin with my matter. The first speaker will be talking about the environment of co-ed schools, while my second speaker will talk about eliminating patriarchy. 100 years ago, a girl woke up to find that nothing had changed. There was still no equal education, still had no political rights, no equal opportunity. Today, a girl wakes up to find that she still lives in a male-dominated society, because despite years of suffrage, in the hope that one day a girl will wake up to find that something has changed, and even though a lot has changed since then, 100 years ago, we feel that co-ed schools do not offer the environment that young girls need to push and boost them to live that change. I will provide some context on the environment of co-ed schools firstly. We feel that the environment of co-ed schools is brutal and harsh. Despite what OP makes you think, this is not a harmonious society where all genders get along and where no bullying is. The perfect society. Because despite all of this, how many girls will want to bunk PE in fear of being judged because they're not supposed to be strong, because they're not supposed to be fast? As I said, scared to be judged. As I said, co-ed, we feel, mimics male-dominated environment in a world where girls are allowed to exist. We feel that it pushes young girls into a society that enforces gender roles, therefore patriarchy. We don't want to be too good or not good enough. We're made to believe that we will never be as good as boys, as we are constantly being compared to them. We also feel, my second point is that we feel single-sex schools can be used as a mechanism for empowerment of young women. A safe space where girls will be introduced at a young age to an environment where they feel safe and where female excellence is encouraged. Because bias begins at a young age when they are not old enough to be able to handle the extreme stereotype and pushed into roles that they're really not comfortable with. And the truth is, bias is everywhere. And we do not want to witness the crushing effects of misogyny. We believe that this is the perfect opportunity to reform single-sex schools, as no school can be perfect, and we feel that there are faults in a single-sex school, but we believe that it can be reformed. And this motion can give the opportunity to do it. Protect girls and give them the confidence to be empowered in an environment that focuses on their development. This is difficult at co-ed schools because they constantly face bias, stereotypes, and gender divides. This is enforced from a young age, and we believe when you're surrounded by a so real-world environment, it enforces gender division. As no matter what Prop says, there's no such thing as an equal society, but can be if we start. And if girls are better equipped to face the dark and scary real world when introduced to it. We hope that this definition will cause a girl to wake up tomorrow to find that although change comes steady and slowly, that she can live the change. Thank you.
Our thanks to the first speaker. Wow, that took a lot. First speaker for the opposition, and if we could please call on the second speaker for the proposition to continue their case. Thank you.
Greetings to the floor at large. I'm going to jump straight into my rebuttal. So, first of all, I would like to point out that the point of school is to prepare its pupils for the real world. Keeping girls or boys, which doesn't really seem to have been brought up at all, in a pampered little environment where they're safe and nurtured is not going to prepare them for the, yes, unequal and biased society that they will be entering as soon as they leave school. Secondly, gender roles are not in any way enforced in co-ed schools. As my first speaker mentioned, when you're in a co-ed school, you aren't forced into the stereotype of your particular gender. All the other genders are there, so all the other characteristics are there as well. So there are diverse friend groups. You can be friends with both boys and girls. A guy can be friends with girls if he feels more comfortable with them, instead of being forced to be friends with guys and guys only, and being surrounded by all the stereotypes that revolve in that particular gender. Thirdly, another thing that was mentioned was that having a co-ed school, separates and forces a divide between the two genders. Well, they're in the same school. How is it doing that? Single-sex schools teaches you that you are so inferior that you have to be taken away from the other sex, or that you are superior to the other sex and that you have to be put in a separate environment. Either way, it's enforcing, difference. It's enforcing a split between the two genders, and it's not saying we need to be equal. It's saying we are different and we should remain different and not interact for the rest of our lives, which is going to be very problematic when the pupils enter the real world. Right. So on to my positive matter. My first point is that implementing this motion would help pupils develop confidence in situations in the outside world that involve both genders. So confidence in interacting with the other gender is essential in the workplace, in adult life, in adult relationships. So it's going to be a huge problem if the people who have been at a single-sex school enter the real world and they haven't interacted with the other gender in a classroom setting where there is the pressure of getting things right, where there is, that kind of element. If it's not been done away with at a young age, if you haven't learnt that being in a classroom with the other gender does not mean that there's more pressure on you to get everything correct. Everybody's human, However, if you're in single-sex schools, it alienates the other gender, and suddenly you're put together in a setting, social or in a workplace, and you are having to, you're suddenly nervous around the other gender because you haven't experienced them in that setting before. You don't realize that they're human, that they mess up too. There's more pressure on you to succeed. There's more pressure, yeah. So that's a huge problem in real-world interface. So, pupils and people going into the real world need to know how to speak to the other gender in a working environment, because obviously you can't really avoid that. So, developing confidence in interacting with people of the other gender at a young age is very, very important, right? So my second point is that you need to be able to work alongside the other gender in an environment where you actually need to succeed to complete some form of a task. So in a co-ed school, you're obviously in a classroom together all the time, you do group projects together, so it teaches you to manage, male-female group dynamics, and it kind of, to value each idea or contribution as equal, whereas in a single-sex school, you have no idea how to deal with group dynamics because you've never been in a group with boys and girls for some kind of a group project before. And another thing that's going to come up is that both genders act different when they're around their friends, and this can be extremely confusing for the other gender. So there's also a possibility that pupils from a single-sex school background may overcredit or discredit the ideas of those from the other gender because they've not been in an environment with them all along, and they don't know that the ideas are actually equal, that we're equal. Because separating people into two different sexes, into two different sex schools, is enforcing a divide between the genders, which is why co-ed schools approaching the outside world.
The House thanks the second proposition speaker and calls on the second opposition speaker to continue their case.
Patriarchy is such a disgusting culture. It is so perverse, and to subject girls to a co-ed environment can often be a traumatic experience, whereas a single-sex school can create a model that empowers women. And we believe that we can empower both sides and mitigate the gender lines by sticking with single-sex schools. I would like to first go into my rebuttal. One thing that proposition first speaker said is that we alienate the other gender. We aren't, and like my first speaker said, we aren't completely separated from the other genders. We're allowed to see each other. Another thing is gender lines is one of the things that I thought most of while I was listening to the first speaker's speech. Gender lines are more enforced in a co-ed school where men are expected to be more masculine and women are expected to be more feminine. When they also said something about in the outside world you need to be confident. Well, in the outside world there's going to be bias and there's going to be things that none of us can control. So wouldn't it be better for a woman to be able to say to a man in a work environment if she's being harassed or anything, to be able to say to the man, bugger off, because she's grown in a society where women are empowered and not just told that they need to squeal and run away, and when they need to squeal or run to watch the boys' hockey or rugby match every single weekend. Second speaker also said something about preparing them for the real world. But as I just said, the real world is biased, and to grow up in a society like a single-sex environment where you are empowered, you're going to be able to say stuff you to the opposite gender if they're being unprofessional. Now I'd like to go into my positive matter. The first issue that I'll be talking about is how we can eliminate the patriarchy without harm to women. In a perfect world, we would be able to eliminate the patriarchy in all boys' schools by having boys call out each other, and teachers call them out as well for saying perverse and problematic things about women. When there is no one there to call them out, we create an environment where boys continue with the patriarchy and continue to think that women are objects. We are looking to eliminate the patriarchy itself. And in this environment, we will eliminate the culture of patriarchy without having to put a girl in a situation that would cause her psychological harm. We can orientate an environment where everyone is equal, where everyone is equally held accountable to their actions, and create a healthy environment for everybody. My second point is that we can reform the way we look at feminine men and masculine women in all boys and all girls schools. In an ideal world, we would allow more feminine men who feel more comfortable around women to go to all girls schools, and the same for women. But this isn't the case. But if we break down the system of patriarchy, we can create a culture in boys and girls schools where feminine and masculine men and women are still considered men and women in the eyes of their peers. We create an environment where if someone is more masculine and more powerful, or if someone is more feminine and more girly, in the sense of the word, we have an environment where everybody is accepted and no one is harassed for having feminine or male tendencies. We aren't bullied for the way we act, because we just don't fit the gender lines drawn in these co-ed schools. We break down the patriarchy, we break down the gender binary, and we create a safe and happy environment. Where culture includes everyone in all senses of the word. Thank you.
This House extends its thanks to the second opposition speaker, and we now call on the third proposition speaker to offer their rebuttal to the case thus far.
Good evening to the floor at large. I'll be representing side proposition as third speaker for the purpose of this debate. So, throughout the course of this debate, we have proven and demonstrated that co-ed schools are a preferable social environment and system to approach the outside world. I will now rebut the points of side opposition, thus showing you why our points take the cake and side proposition takes the debate. So, the first point I'd like to address is co-ed schools traumatizing girls. So, first of all, I can't help but notice that they failed to explain what they meant by traumatic. How is it going to traumatize them? I need to know so I can explain why it's not going to traumatize them. So, to the point that we did get from that, whereas they said that co-ed schools were going to traumatize girls, whereas if you were in a single-sex school, they aim to empower girls. And to that I ask, why can you not be empowered in the presence of boys? If you cannot be empowered in the presence of boys in school, how are you going to go into the real world and feel empowered in your own body and live your life as an empowered woman or an empowered man? The next point I'd like to address is, we are not isolating one gender from another. But to that I'd like to say, that is exactly what is being done. That is exactly what you're doing in a single-sex school. You're taking one gender and you're isolating it in one school so that they can learn separate from the other gender. Yes, I acknowledge you have brothers, you have sisters, you have friends, you have family, and you're still going to see people of different genders in town or in the real world. But the majority of your time is going to be spent at your school learning. That's what you do every day until you matriculate, and you're stuck with either all these girls or all these boys, and that's it. That's your norm. That's what you're going to know for the next few years. So you are essentially isolating people. I'd like to give an example about a girl. Let's name this girl Sam. Sam was sent to an all-girls school. And Sam learned to be empowered because she's surrounded by girls, she's always comfortable, and she loves herself, she loves her friends, and she feels comfortable in her own skin, and that's really good. Then Sam goes to Rhodes University. Sam realizes that there's boys and girls at her school, and she realizes that she's not going to be always comfortable, and she realizes that she's going to need to work on being empowered in the presence of boys, and she wished that she had been able to do that more in school. Now, let's swap that example around. Sam was actually sent to a co-ed school, and she learned that she was not always going to be comfortable because sometimes boys make her uncomfortable, sometimes girls make her uncomfortable too, and she knows that. She learns how to deal with it so that she can go into the real world and she can know how to live her life being empowered in the presence of both boys and girls. The next thing I'd like to address is the point of us thinking that co-ed schools are a perfect society. No. I absolutely do not think that co-ed schools are a perfect society or environment. Boys get annoying, girls get annoying, it gets annoying. But I'd like to say that the one good thing that I know, that I'm so sure about going to a co-ed school, is that I will know how to deal with that. I know how to tell boys to back off when they're annoying. I know how to tell girls to go away when they're being annoying. I know how to deal with it, and I'm going to know how to deal with it later in life. The next thing I'd like to address is being compared constantly in co-ed schools. Would you not compare brother and sister schools? For example, do we not compare SAC and DSG? We do, just as much as we compare each other in Kingswood, a co-ed school. The next thing I'd like to say is that if it can be fixed in a single-sex school, why can it not be fixed in a co-ed school? We can fix it in either of those, so that point falls flat. If you cannot deal with the so-called trauma of being in a co-ed school, how in the world are you going to manage life? Because that's co-ed. So, another thing I picked up on was that men are expected to be more masculine and girls are expected to be more feminine in a co-ed school. I go to a co-ed school, and I have learned one thing, very important thing, is that I can be as feminine or as masculine as I want to be, in school, in university, in life. So another thing that I picked up on is that side opposition was only talking about girls. In order to get the full grasp of this debate, I think we should have talked about both boys and girls because the motion did not specify. So the point I'm trying to get across is that, yes, stereotypes, it's all bad, but how are you going to learn how to deal with that if you don't do it in school? Now that I've dealt with side opposition's points, I will, like my previous speakers, deal with ours, with a summary of side proposition's debate. My previous speakers dealt with the points of developing confidence in situations involving both genders, teaching to work alongside opposite genders, and single-sex schools alienating other genders. On the point of single-sex schools alienating the other gender, my first speaker said that when you're in a gender-separated school, you don't interact the same with the other gender, causing yourself to become alienated, causing yourself to fit into stereotypes of your gender. Furthermore, this whole process of alienation puts the same-sex schools at a disadvantage to their present selves and their future. On my second speaker's point of working with individuals and dealing with the other gender, it was said that if you go to school with the opposite gender, you grow used to performing in front of them, thus building your confidence around them for the future. Next, it was said that it would be easier to work with them in the future, essentially proving that being in schools together as both genders prepares you for what you're in school for in the first place, the real world and your future. Co-ed schools approaching the outside world. Thank you.
Our thanks to the third proposition speaker. We now call on the third opposition speaker to conclude the substantive part of tonight's debate.
Good evening. So a few of the clashes that we've been having is talking about how empowerment of girls and empowerment of boys, and how girls squeal at the sight of boys when they're not allowed to see them. But actually, we feel that at a single-sex school, you're groomed to be able to get into a workspace and work with them and be like, hey, this is what I think, if you feel like your ideas aren't getting heard. Also, the second speaker was talking about how, working together and you'll be nervous. But actually, in single-sex schools, you're taught to be affirmative in what you have to say, and you have to, work with other people. Because when you get to a single-sex school, you meet people anyway that are of different religion, different ideas, who believe in certain things that are different from you. So just because we're not working with boys who are biologically different from us doesn't mean that we're not able to work with them when we reach the real world. Because we talk with people who may have different ideas from us, and we're not hinted by the fact that they are different from us body part wise. Also, the first speaker talked about, how girls get into a fetish squeal over boys, but actually we don't truly, and as co-ed girls would not get squirmish over their boys playing rugby, so do single-sex girls, because we see them we see them at socials and we get tired of them already. And yes.
The point about girls getting squished was not a matter of example, it was something that I've seen from girls' schools before.
And actually, even if you've seen girls get squirmish at single-sex schools, so it happens here too. You see girls saying, oh my gosh, there's my crush. Because girls do that, girls will be girls. And it's not like being around girls will make you even more girlier. If you're a tomboyish girl, then you'll be like, ugh, anyway. So, yeah. Yes, single-sex school girls, you'll see more of the girls doing that because it's just girls, but here too. Okay. And also, you said that we should talk more about girls being traumatized at co-ed schools, and we're saying this because if you're having a talk about, let's say, sex, okay? And a boy says something that doesn't make you feel comfortable. But instead, if it was a single-sex schools with boys, just boys, the boys and teachers could be like, no. The boys and teachers could be like, no, boy, you don't do that. And not costing girls, the trauma. Okay. And proposition carries on making it seem like girls are, boys and girls are caged away from each other at single-sex schools, but that is not the case. We have interactions with them which are monitored just enough, and if you're saying that we're not prepared for the real world, that's okay. Having an artificial, you're saying that single-sex schools are artificial and making us seem like we're not ready for the real world, when in fact, if you are put in an environment where you are groomed to be confident, strong young women, then you'll go into the world as confident, strong young women, and not be afraid to tell a man no, not be afraid to tell a woman no about anything. Okay. Oh, and you also failed to mention how you empower girls at a co-ed school and how you empower boys at a co-ed school. And also, even if you tell us how you empower boys at a co-ed school, the education of a boy has never, ever been at stake, because because as my first speaker said, women have only been allowed to go to school for a few hundred years. Also, and with that, at girls' schools, girls are taught to be empowered, as I've said before, taught to be confident. And for all these reasons and more, women being empowered at single-sex schools, being taught that you can be anything you want to be, strong and confident, and that they're able to work with the male, even if they may not see them on a daily basis. I'm proud to stand with side opposition. Thank you.
This House thanks the third opposition speaker. We'd now like to hear from the opposition reply speaker.
Hello again. I felt that Proposition's whole debate was basically about alienating gender. They did mention other stuff, but their whole debate is based on this. Prop 2 mentioned that this will help enter a classroom setting. So the millions of people who enter single-sex schools don't only lack social skills with boys, but also cannot operate in an educational environment with boys. You mentioned that it helps to develop the confidence to meet the gender outside. Firstly, we are not isolating girls from boys. They get many other social opportunities. And so now, girls are empowered. Sam was empowered in a single-sex school, and she got to Rhodes University, and all her morals were broken down because she was in a class with a boy. So now boys are disempowering girls. Yet another reason why we shouldn't have co-ed schools, and exactly agreeing with our BOP that girls should be empowered in a single-sex school. I would like to clarify about the traumatized, as your third speaker seemed to not really understand what we meant by this. Let's use Sam as an example. Sam goes to a co-ed school. She's starting in grade 1 and she's really excited. It's her first phys ed class and she is really excited as she loves to run and she thinks she's the fastest girl at home. But then she's told, boys are there, girls are there. You have to have separate phys ed practices. She asked why. The teacher told her, because boys are just a little stronger and faster than girls. Girls are traumatized as they're always together and constantly being compared. Don't you realize when you have these two different genders side by side, even though they share a lot of things, they're also forced to be compared. When a single-sex school, their confidence is built up, so they know that they are fast and they are strong. And even though they may not be as fast as girls and boys, they know that they are fast enough and can really flourish in an environment when they do go to the outside world. And the truth is, a girl like Sam is not prepared emotionally to deal with this gender divide that she really doesn't understand yet. This whole debate is based on girls not having the social or working skills and not emotion that. And we believe that this is not true. As you said, we are all human. So how does that make it less easy to understand them? And we believe and we want to give girls like Sam the opportunity to flourish in an environment where they are encouraged to be their best that they can be without having to be sided next to boys. And I'd like to thank you guys.
The House thanks the opposition reply speaker once more and the entirety of the opposition team. And to conclude this debate, we call on the proposition reply speaker.
Good evening again, floor at large. I'll be starting with identifying the clashes. Okay, so I'll build up in importance. First, we had a little clash about in which situation can girls present themselves better. Mainly, the entire debate revolved around girls, but I'll get to that in a minute. So the opposition's idea was that single-sex schools is going to keep you comfortable in your situation when presenting yourself, and when you're presenting in a single-sex school, it's going to be great, you're going to feel great. And sure, okay, we'll give that to you. You'll feel really confident in a single-sex school, presenting a oral or whatever it is that you're doing. But once you leave school, there are going to be the other gender around you. And what are you going to do? Because that wasn't a part of your training, that wasn't something you were ready for. What are you going to do then? And there was also another clash about what's going to make that, like, fitting into that clash was what's going to make girls like more comfortable to tell a boy to go away. Although I don't know why we assumed that every male interaction we have is going to be about telling them to go away. But anyway, and don't you think that, as side proposition brought forward tonight, that being around them, working with them, talking to them, interacting with them, socializing with them is going to make you more comfortable to talk to them, and it's going to let you know how to tell them, okay, you're making me uncomfortable, without offending them and making them out to be some predator, which we got a lot of from side opposition tonight. Okay, my third, and I found the sole clash of this debate, was which school was going to encourage more patriarchy, a male-dominated society. So the proposition gave us the idea that you can, if you are in a co-ed school, you can work with any group you want to be in. You have far more options for socializing and different groups that you can fit into, and you don't have to fit into your stereotypical gender roles. And yes, we admit, okay, for girls' schools, maybe it is easier for girls to empower each other, but you refuse to acknowledge how it is for the boys to be in all-boys schools. And they did not come across to tell us anything about that. And they kept making out boys to be so scary, which perhaps is something that comes from the entire thing of single-sex schools, is that they're made out to be scarier and they're made out to be predators. And we didn't get any ideas of how it's valuable to have them as in your social circles. And they showed no regard to what having boys in your social group does for the social dynamic. And we got this whole idea that, but they completely missed that boys are also valuable in the world. And we didn't get anything about how they're valuable. All we got was how we need to empower women. Yes, we do, but we need to empower men too, and we need to let them know that it is okay for them to be human and for them to feel emotional. And the only feedback we got on how it is for boys in single-sex schools, the only thing that they came and told us was, oh, well, if a boy's kind of emotional, ideally we'd let them into an all-girls school. And I am afraid to tell you that letting a boy into an all-girls school is called co-ed.
I think before I start speaking, we can afford to give both of these teams another very large round of applause. And I think we can also agree that regardless of whether we choose to adopt a co-ed model or a single-sex model, we still have some incredibly intelligent, capable, and articulate young women, and we should be very proud of them tonight. And I know I certainly am very proud of both of the teams in this debate. I think we have identified some incredibly important and pertinent issues, and I think the level of analysis and argumentation has been truly impressive, particularly considering that these are just high school children. That said, let's move into what happened in the debate, and ultimately how I have decided today's debate. So it's tried to say that this debate rested almost entirely on the issue of gender parity and which side best allowed particularly female students to go forth empowered or confident, depending on which parlance you choose to adopt, and conquer the world, having had an incredible education. In large part, this rested on one positive attribute and one negative attribute of both co-ed and single-sex schools. So we were told that single-sex schools provided people, and particularly girls, with empowerment, and that co-ed schools, on the other hand, provided them with trauma. And from proposition, we heard that co-ed schools provided confidence and single-sex schools provided inferiority. And I think it's clear that both of those are kind of interchangeable, and really the debate rested on who managed to best prove the outcomes that they thought schools were achieved. And I'm glad that we could agree on the role of schools within this debate, but I think it would be remiss of me not to mention that in as much as it afforded great depth in this debate, it did perhaps leave out some issues which could also have been touched on. So as much as confidence or empowerment is an incredibly important thing for schools to consider, I think it could also have rested in a larger discussion around the academic value of schools and the way in which pupils don't only interact with each other in a school setting, but also with teachers and how it affects their home environment, and all of these other factors that also play a role in the development of young children. That said, I don't think it was a great loss to this debate to have focused in narrowly, because it did allow for great depth of argumentation, and that was what was particularly impressive about today's debate. So let's move into these ideas that were proposed. On the idea of empowerment in single-sex schools, we were given to believe that by taking girls away from the detrimental influence of young boys and the threat of patriarchy that they imposed on these girls, girls would have a safe environment with which to develop themselves, with which to develop their confidence, so that at the point where they then had to step into the inequality of major society, they would be able to take that confidence and presumably rectify the wrongs that they found in that society, which I think is a compelling argument. And I think it's hard to imagine how girls could ever have the strength or confidence to try and rectify those wrongs if they aren't allowed that space and that confidence in the first place. From side proposition, however, we hear that actually this process of empowerment is a fictitious process, precisely because of the vacuum in which it's created. And by removing the threat as a whole, it doesn't mean that people are given confidence, it simply means that they're never exposed to a threat. And the moment that they are, perhaps then they will see that the empowerment that they've been given is shallow and empty and collapse in on themselves. Now, I think, as with all arguments, ultimately we rest somewhere in the middle, right? I think it's true to say that we are convinced from side opposition that this will give women empowerment, but it is also fair to say that it would be hard to expect people to come into contact with this gender imparity for the first time and still have all of that confidence with which they've been imbued over the years. Furthermore, from side proposition, we get the idea that by removing people, you don't actually create confidence. You create a sense of inferiority, because separation always implies hierarchy. I think this could have been expanded on a lot more, particularly considering the interesting parallels it makes with the doctrine of separate but equal, with which I think we're well acquainted in South Africa. And I think to expand on the idea that telling girls in the first place that they need to be separated from boys implies that we're telling girls that they are too weak to take on boys from a young age, that they need that separation, that they need to be absent from a threat in order to take it on. And instead to propose that by putting them together with boys, we empower them simply by telling them that they are worthy to be in the same space as boys. I think that would have been a powerful argument to make that wasn't quite fully extended. Nonetheless, we do hear that in their absence, girls simply don't know what to expect from boys and take much longer to acquire the skills once they do leave school in order to effectively combat that. Then, in response to this argument, from side opposition, we hear a very interesting idea, and that's that this isn't a total separation imposed in single-sex schools. That besides the fact that in the classroom there may be separation of genders, in other settings there may well be interaction that affords them the skills that side proposition wants them to have without the trauma of constant co-ed schooling. This is an interesting argument that immediately seems to sound like a well-balanced idea leaning towards side opposition, but ultimately is quite a concession. Because presumably, if increased social interaction between boys and girls is a good thing, then there's not really any reason to keep them separate at any point. If there is a reason, that needed to be provided explicitly, and it wasn't. So ultimately, I felt that that was a fairly dangerous concession to make without further context given by side opposition on that point. We also don't get much of a response to the idea of inferiority provided by separation, right? We're told that, well, you know, there will still be some interaction. And again, this simply implies that without that interaction, there would be a sense of separation, there would be a sense of inferiority, and that this isn't desirable. And so again, what seems to be a response actually concedes a great deal of ground to side proposition's argument. But I think what's missing from most of these arguments is an actual characterization of the problem. It's assumed on both sides that the greater problem is patriarchy, gender inequality, but it isn't ever defined, and we don't get much of a sense of how it transfers. So, for example, we are never told how boys become patriarchal in the first instance. Most of this debate centers around how we teach girls to combat the patriarchy, but not in terms of how we teach boys not to impose patriarchal ideas on girls. Perhaps it would have been a good idea for side proposition to spend some time talking about the fact that exposing boys to girls right from the outset, specifically at a developmental stage, allows them to break out of harmful ideas. It would be unfair of me not to mention that side proposition does begin on this track of thought by saying that it teaches both genders to view each other as human and capable of making mistakes. But I think a specific focus on how patriarchy is caused, as opposed to simply how to fight it, would have benefited the debate as a whole. I think the other thing that might have been missing is to expand on that and then to talk about the roles of girls and boys particularly, right? And the fact that a large reason why patriarchy is able to continue, if not why it exists in the first place, is that girls become complicit in it. That in being exposed to patriarchal situations, there's a process of indoctrination that occurs, where girls are taught gender roles and taught to feel comfortable within them. And I think an analysis of the ways in which both co-ed and single-sex schools are capable of doing this could also have been valuable. So in as much as co-ed schools might provide for girls to see masculine traits and adopt them, it also could teach them to see masculine traits and view them as specifically masculine. Whereas in a single-sex school, anyone with a masculine trait is not actually a boy, and therefore inherently the implication is that that trait can be feminine as well. So I think, again, further analysis would have benefited. All of that said, however, I want to reiterate again that the level of argumentation we got was incredibly impressive, and that on the basis of the questioning of the process of this empowerment, how it translates into the real world, the idea of the value of social interaction, and the idea of exposing people to the real world and giving them confidence, which we don't really hear much attacked by side opposition. Ultimately, this debate is awarded to side proposition. Thank you all very much for sitting through that, and particularly for sitting through my very long and rambling feedback. But I'm hoping it will at least benefit the teams. And I'd like to invite you both to come and have a discussion with me afterwards. There's a couple of more debatary things that I haven't wanted to bore the rest of you with. But once again, congratulations to both teams. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience, and have a good night.